You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
I'm Rafer Guzman, film critic for Newsday.
And I'm Kristen Meinzer, culture critic and co-author of How to Be Fine.
Together, we host Movie Therapy with Rafer and Kristen.
In each episode, we read letters from real people in real quandaries. Emily says, "Dear Rafer and Kristen, I'm raising a kid who is, to put it bluntly, weird."
Then we dispense a bit of questionable advice. I'm so bad at dating.
No.
I'm the worst dater. Oh, God, I'm just horrible at it.
And finally, we prescribe movies and TV shows to help our listeners through whatever ails them.
I like the doppelganger character, this kind of...
She was terrible.
It's part advice show, part watch list, plenty of empathy, and lots of laughs. Did my wife write this letter in under the name Katie?
Listen to Movie Therapy with Rafer and Kristen wherever you get your favorite shows.
That's Movie Therapy with Rafer and Kristen.
No matter how good we are at what we do, no matter how normal the day begins, things just go wrong. Sometimes we see it coming, but most times we simply don't. I'm Frank Sapovitz, the host of When Things Go Wrong. You'll meet fascinating people who had to manage difficult problems, often under tremendous pressure. From business leaders, law enforcement pros, athletes, actors, and more, you'll hear stories of tragedy and triumph and learn how they met crisis head on. Find When Things Go Wrong on your favorite podcast app.
Almost 10 years ago, Bloomberg journalist Brad Stone captured the rise of Amazon in his bestseller, The Everything Store. Since then, Amazon has expanded exponentially, inventing novel products like Alexa and disrupting countless industries, while its workforce has quintupled in size and its valuation has soared to well over $1 trillion. Jeff Bezos' empire, once housed in a garage, now spans the globe. Between services like Whole Foods, Prime Video, and Amazon's cloud computing unit, AWS, plus Bezos' ownership of the Washington Post, it's impossible to go a day without encountering its impact. We live in a world run, supplied, and controlled by Amazon and its iconoclast founder. Now, Brad Stone presents a vividly drawn portrait of how a retail upstart became one of the most powerful and feared entities in the global economy and probes the evolution of Bezos himself in his new bestseller, Amazon Unbound, Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire. And today, I welcome Brad back to the podcast to discuss how Amazon exploded during the pandemic, how the company's purchase of Whole Foods has proven the critics wrong, and why the online retail giant is now making a big bet on brick-and-mortar stores. We get into the fraught process of selecting the second Amazon headquarters that became a PR disaster, and how Bezos managed to triumph over a different public scandal surrounding sexting and his extramarital affair. Plus, Bezos' relationship with his frenemy Elon Musk, why he's choosing to retire from Amazon at this point, and what's next for the company known as the Everything Store. Coming up with Brad Stone in just a moment. Brad Stone is Senior Executive Editor of Global Technology at Bloomberg News and has covered Silicon Valley for more than 20 years. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Everything Store, Jeff Bezos and the Age of Amazon, which has been translated into over 35 languages, and The Upstarts, Uber, Airbnb, and the Battle for the New Silicon Valley. Now he's out with a sequel of sorts to his first book. It's called Amazon Unbound, Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire. Brad Stone, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Ben.
Well, Brad, your first book, of course, covered Amazon founder Jeff Bezos' ambition for this little online bookseller to become what he called the Everything Store and to expand into all other markets. 6 or 7 years since that book, has Amazon achieved that dream? Can you think of any legal product that Amazon doesn't sell?
Probably. I like the qualification of legal. Real estate, What else don't they sell? That's a fun, kind of a fun exercise. You can find most of just about everything, but it was already the everything store, a decade ago, I think, when I wrote the book. I mean, it's obviously selection has expanded since then, but it's the everything company now. And that's why I wanted to write this book. I was pretty proud of the first book as being a historical account of the early years of Amazon and the biography of Jeff Bezos. But I came to realize that the whole thing was sort of outdated, right? With Alexa and the grocery stores and the globalization of the marketplace, Jeff's ownership of the Washington Post, his space company Blue Origin, the whole peculiar tabloid scandal around his personal life, and then Amazon's navigation of the pandemic. There was really like a whole other story to tell. I kind of joke that this is the Empire Strikes Back. The first book was Star Wars. The problem with that is it suggests that I need to do Return of the Jedi. And I don't know if I have that in me, but it's definitely like this book, Amazon Unbound, I think, is in some ways the better business story. It's a $100 billion company becoming a $1.6 trillion company. And I feel like anybody in business, or who's really interested in the direction of American society and the global economy should be interested in understanding how Bezos and his colleagues did it.
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt that the pandemic has actually been a boon for Amazon. Let's talk numbers. From the start of this pandemic to right this moment, how much has Amazon's revenue grown?
Oh boy, you're gonna make me scamper for the annual results. I mean, I think it's been like 35% sales growth. They've added 500,000 employees. The market cap has gone from about 800 billion to 1.6 trillion. Actually, it had touched 1 trillion, I think, in 2018, but then it dipped back down, and it surpassed the threshold to stay right in the early days of the pandemic. And now it's $1.5 trillion. So by every measure, it's like an extraordinary growth. And it's kind of perverse, right? Because there has been so much suffering during the pandemic, and Amazon, through circumstance was was able to take advantage because people didn't want to go into stores. And so it became a kind of lifeline of sorts. And obviously, investor enthusiasm and sales growth has all been reflected.
Yeah, and it's funny because I remember a lot of people criticized Amazon's purchase of Whole Foods a few years back. This high-end coastal elite grocery store where you can buy 100 different kinds of gourmet cheese, but you can't find a roll of Charmin. People used to call it whole paycheck because it was so expensive. And yet over the past year, my wife and I have relied entirely on Whole Foods delivery. Has that now proven to be a pretty smart buy for Amazon?
Well, it's interesting. And I tell the whole story of Bezos's awakening to the grocery imperative in the book. And he was really reluctant for a long time, even though his deputies were bugging him about it, because he thought that groceries would be there, that it wasn't a land rush opportunity. He saw investments in China and India and in Alexa and the Fire Phone, which ultimately failed, as being more urgent priorities. And then what happened, and this often happens in the history of Amazon, they say that they are not focused on competitors, right? Every company says that, and Amazon makes a big deal out of it. But in about 2015, Google started delivering groceries, a service called Google Express, and Instacart came on the scene and started delivering groceries from major grocery stores. And Amazon realized that it potentially could be outflanked. And the grocery category, even though it's a very difficult one and is very low margin, is important because people shop for food multiple times a day. And Amazon's got a great business, but with people who shop at Amazon maybe once or twice or 3 times a month. And so groceries and drugstore items, or consumables as they call them, became very important. They tried to do it themselves with services called Amazon Fresh and Prime Now, and it wasn't growing. And then what happened was Whole Foods was in distress. Like John Mackey down in Austin was going to have to sell the company. It wasn't performing that well. So I think it was smart. It was circumstance. But what we've seen recently is Amazon is opening up a different kind of grocery store. They're called either Amazon Fresh or they're called the Amazon Go stores. And they use a lot of technology in the ceilings and in the shelves or in the grocery carts. to automatically charge customers for what they buy. And so, yes, it was smart to buy Whole Foods, but in some ways, the future of Amazon and groceries isn't Whole Foods. I think they want to do, they want to offer Charmin and Pepsi, things that people want, and they also want to use technology to kind of disrupt the business.
Well, I want to ask you about that expansion into brick and mortar convenience stores. Why does the biggest online retail giant suddenly feel the need to invest in a bunch of sort of high-tech 7-Elevens? What's their game there?
Okay, well, this is another story I tell in the book. Bezos wants to do everything differently. He wants to create Amazon flourishes, and he thinks he can do really hard things. And he wants to innovate at the frontier of technology, and that is artificial intelligence and computer vision. And, he was getting bugged and asked over and over in the early years of this past decade, when is Amazon going to open up a physical store? And he wanted some unique way to do it. And the idea of the Go Store was partly his idea. Can you make it more convenient for customers, save time? Nobody likes to wait in line. Can you, put the technology in the walls and the ceilings so that it just recognizes when you buy something? And interestingly, it's taken 10 years. The rollout has been slow. They just started introducing it into larger grocery formats. So it's sort of unclear whether it works or not, or whether really people care. Like, I don't mind waiting in the groceries, in the line. They read your email, and yet they clearly see it as an advantage, as an advantage. And they've got this other path, the grocery cart, where it kind of scans stuff when you put it in, but those carts are small. And so far, all this stuff is a novelty. And Bezos does have a tolerance to invest in things, but usually he wants to see results after about 10 years. And we're going to hit 10 years. And so I just wonder how much patience they'll have for this. But that was the original idea behind it. And they've invested billions of dollars. I mean, one person did describe it to me as one of the biggest investments in Amazon history. It's probably right up there alongside China in terms of the money that they've burned. And so far, I'm not sure they have that much to show for it.
You mentioned a moment ago Alexa. You actually report in Amazon Unbound that Jeff Bezos was intimately involved in the development of Alexa, even handpicking the voice actress for Alexa. Why was this so important to him? I mean, there has to be a larger strategy. I'm guessing that it wasn't just about selling speakers or digital assistants. So what was the end game with Alexa?
Well, first, let me say, just because I'm enormously proud of it, I did have this goal for myself when I started the book. Can I figure out whose voice that is coming out of a speaker? And well, yeah, so it's in the book. And we knew who Siri's voice was, but never who Alexa's voice was. And so I figured it out that it's this woman, Nina Raleigh from Boulder, a voice actress. And Amazon wouldn't let her talk to me, but I was able to confirm that it was her. And you go to her website and you can tell it's her voice, doing these commercials. And who knows, that could be the most ubiquitous voice in history, maybe. I mean, maybe we can figure who would maybe the subway announcer in New York. I don't know. But
used to be James Earl Jones on CNN, but I think she's certainly surpassed that.
Yeah, maybe Darth Vader.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
Bezos, yeah, he's a science fiction fan, and he had this notion that, of a versatile artificially intelligent assistant, like her, the movie Her or the Star Trek computer. That was the big one. And funny enough, Alexa's never really reached that, right? It's not conversational. But he had the vision. He also wanted to exploit Amazon's advantage in the cloud, and Alexa's brains are in Amazon's data centers. He and like a lot of new things at Amazon, even ridiculous things, like I have in the book how he spent all this time trying to develop a single cow burger for Amazon's grocery service. He just he likes to put himself on the new stuff as opposed to, testifying before Congress. And like Alexa was a promising, exciting new thing. And, it was probably really appealing to him as a geeky visionary.
I wonder, does the actress who voices Alexa, does she want to speak publicly about that? Or is that, I would imagine that someone like that would be kind of afraid. This voice in everyone's home and some nut, seeks her out.
There's that, but there's also probably the contract that I would assume that she's under with Amazon. Amazon doesn't want to see their voice out there, Alexa's an illusion, right? That voice belongs to Alexa. So they've tried to keep it secret, just like Apple wasn't excited about Susan Bennett, the voice of Siri, getting out there. And, I assume the same for Google. And so it's not that I think she's fearful. I don't think she's allowed to talk is the bottom line, which is unfortunate. I mean, when you think about it, her voice has been in the Super Bowl for like the last 5 years, and she can't talk about that. So, it's interesting.
Do you find Amazon's use of artificial intelligence and data gathering problematic personally?
I mean, I'd be hypocritical if I did, because right now, Ben, I'm actually staring at the Alexa in this room that I had to mute so that it wouldn't chirp up when we talked. If like I was really fearful, then I wouldn't have one in my office where I wrote and conducted most of the interviews for this book. Now, okay, to be clear, I did have it on mute during most of those interviews, but I don't know. I feel like maybe this is sort of a weakness of mine, but I just feel like if any of these companies really betray their customers' trust or manipulate, they're going to suffer the consequences. And of course, we have seen big mistakes. Often they're technical errors, and we've seen Facebook and other companies make mistakes and suffer. And I feel like Bezos and Amazon, they might make involuntary mistakes, but in terms of outright manipulation or subterfuge, or their intentions are generally good. They're trying to create useful products.
Just out of curiosity, did you ever try interviewing Alexa about Jeff Bezos?
Oh yeah, no, of course. It's very unsatisfying. You don't get very far. She's like a Wikipedia entry, and that is all.
Okay. Well, I want to talk about another one of Bezos's pet projects, his space company, Blue Origin, which has sort of lagged behind SpaceX and Virgin Galactic. You get into that in this book, and I'm curious, what has held Blue Origin back up till now? Yeah,
it's really a great question. Because Bezos isn't accustomed to being second in anything. And here, SpaceX is, pulling off technical feats every single day. And not only that, but the U.S. government is paying SpaceX to go to space. And meanwhile, Blue Origin hasn't launched anything meaningful yet. They've done some tests. And Bezos is personally financing it with at least $1 billion worth of Amazon stock. So that's not to say that they won't catch up, but the road ahead will be difficult. And I just think that Jeff made some wrong assumptions early on, which were reasonable at the time. But he thought he could go slow, keep the team small, finance it himself, be patient, move step by step, and kind of roll up from suborbital to orbital to a moon mission in a linear way. And, SpaceX skipped all the intermediate steps, went right to orbit, and commanded all the attention and the glory and the government dollars. And halfway through, Bezos decided he wants to play that game. Why should he spend the money if all of these contracts from NASA and the Pentagon are up for grabs? And so he kind of changed the operating tenor of Blue Origin. He brought in a new CEO. And when you do that, you change gears rapidly. I think you can create a kind of dysfunction. And, there's turnover there. There seems to be a little bit of a morale problem. They could turn it around because they're about to start taking tourists to suborbital space, and that'll be interesting to watch. But, you don't get the sense right now, at least, that it's a very healthy company. But Jeff's retiring as CEO of Amazon, so maybe he'll go and spend some more of his personal time on that.
Maybe. And you report in this book that Bezos supposedly tried to lure away the CEO of SpaceX. So I'm curious if you could describe the relationship between Bezos/Blue Origin and Elon Musk/SpaceX. Are they bitter rivals, frenemies? Is there some mutual respect or a sense of a common goal? What is that relationship like?
You would think there would be more of the latter. So early on in the 2000s, Elon and Jeff had a kind of meeting of the minds. They met a couple of times. They talked about their plans. Jeff was a little bit secretive. He actually gave Elon a tour of Blue Origin's facilities, but he cleared it. He cleared it of employees and any visible signs of the projects they were working on. And I talked to Elon for this book, and he said that he disagreed with Jeff's selection of rocket fuel. for his New Shepard rocket. So they had some technical debates. And then what happened, I would say that there was a shared sense of purpose and a camaraderie early on. And then they started to run into each other, in bidding for the prime launch pad at Cape Canaveral, in, PR in terms of like the first to land a reusable rocket upright. There were some, tweets and other things that crisscrossed. Elon's someone who's punchy and little combative on social media, not as disciplined as Bezos. And, and there's been a tit for tat. And I would say right now, because they compete for things like the NASA's moon mission and other high profile contracts, it is a rivalry, and it's a one-sided one because, as much as Blue Origin wants to say that it's not a race, that there might be many winners, right now there really has only been one winner, and that is SpaceX. And so, I guess the point to make is that Bezos is still the wealthier guy, and and has built probably the more significant and impactful company in Amazon. But clearly there is a little bit of a rivalry there, and boy, is it entertaining to watch and to write about. I think it infuses this book, Amazon Unbound, and you even can look at some things like HQ2, and it's not out of the ballpark to say that Jeff was a little jealous of Elon and the Gigafactory in Nevada and the way that he got a big incentive package and inspired maybe in some small way the HQ2 effort.
We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with more when we return in just a minute.
The Old West is an iconic period of American history. Legendary names of the era still resonate today. Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Butch and Sundance, Wyatt Earp, Bass Reeves and the Texas Rangers, Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse and Geronimo, and many more. The gunfights, bank robberies, train robberies, and battles are still featured in movies and TV shows. But on the Legends of the Old West podcast, you'll get the true stories. And I promise the true stories are just as action-packed as the movies, if not more so. I'm Chris Wimmer. Join me for the only in-depth, long-form storytelling podcast dedicated to the Old West that'll give you the true story with cinematic production value enhanced by music and sound effects. Find Legends of the Old West on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, or wherever you're listening now.
I traveled through time to tell you this. Almost everything that happens in politics today has happened before, has been debated before, maybe in slightly different forms. On My History Can Beat Up Your Politics podcast, since 2006, I've been examining the history behind today's politics and adding layers of context to some of today's debates and telling some great stories. I'm Bruce Carlson. Join me at www.myhistorycanbeatupyourpolitics.com or wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever else you get your podcasts from. Learn how George Washington and FDR supported vaccines in their time. Warren Harding or Ulysses S. Grant took stands on racial justice. John and Abigail Adams and what they had to say about free speech and the press. What Abraham Lincoln had to say on that. What were the conspiracy theories that had to be debated during the debate over the Constitution? Were things more partisan or less partisan in the past? We're balanced on My History Can Beat Up Your Politics, so I promise you won't be infuriated even if you don't agree. We take a balanced approach. So listen, www.myhistorycanbeatupyourpolitics.com.
Interesting. Well, I want to talk about that because you write at length about the selection process for the second headquarters. But I'm also interested in the events that preceded that. Seattle, where they've been based all these years, grew increasingly hostile to Amazon, or some might say Amazon grew increasingly hostile to Seattle and the local government. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. I mean, Seattle before Amazon was a different place, right? I mean, it was sort of suffering in the 90s. There was, this vibrant underground culture, grunge rock. And what happened, is Amazon went from a company of a couple hundred employees to a company of 50,000 employees that occupied a large swath of the commercial real estate. And, this was happening along with the general economic renaissance and the tech boom. And Seattle underwent a lot of changes, increasing housing prices, increasing rents, increasing homelessness. And I live in the Bay Area, and we had the same thing happen here. And the result was the techlash, protests against Google buses, new tax initiatives. And the same thing happened in Seattle. There were some very progressive / socialist members of the city council who were elected, and they start passing taxes that are almost exclusively aimed at big companies, Amazon in particular. And, Bezos, who keeps an eye on some of these things, my sense is, he took it personally, or, that he felt, or the Amazon leadership felt, that they had done a lot for Seattle, and here they were being villainized and singled out. And that led, to this decision, and I reported it in the book for the first time, that Amazon is going to stop growing in Seattle. Bezos capped the growth at 50,000 employees. They start opening offices in Bellevue across Lake Washington, and they start the HQ2 initiative. And, it's funny because that process sort of went off the rails, right? Like they thought that there were these political winds blowing unfavorably in Seattle, but it turned out when they went to New York, that same storm system was occurring there too.
Right. I think they had something like 200 cities vying for the privilege of becoming home to Amazon's HQ2. And really, it sort of devolved into a glorified rose ceremony. And don't you think that it kind of reinforced this image of Amazon as this big, arrogant corporation that, thought everyone should feel, so privileged to have them?
Yeah. Yeah, that wasn't their intention. And they thought that this would be a clarifying exercise. Okay, Seattle, some of the politicians might hate them, but everyone else will want them to come there. And then in New York, they walked into this storm that was fueled in large part by the election of AOC, by the bitter rivalry between Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo in New York State, and by the fact that Amazon had become $1 trillion company, and the whole techlash, and the feeling that a big incentive package was kind of unseemly. And then add the cherry on top of that cake, mixing metaphors, cherry on top of that sundae, is Bezos himself getting personally interested in helicopters, flying helicopters, owning helicopters, dating someone who flew helicopters, and asking for a helipad in New York City at a point where there was a kind of social panic about the crumbling state of the subway and traffic and gridlock. And the whole thing just culminated in this imbroglio that resulted in them pulling out of New York City.
Which of these 200 cities actually made the real short list for HQ2?
Yeah, that's a good one. And remind me, Ben, where are you? Where's the...
I'm in LA.
Okay, you're in LA. They looked at LA and they rejected it because they thought, and I saw all the memos, by the way, in the HQ2 process, and it's all in the book. LA was, it's California. They said in the documents, business hostile state, not geographically diverse enough for Amazon. But I got the selection committee's final recommendation, and it was Raleigh, Chicago, and Philadelphia. And then they took it into the meeting. And the interesting thing is Andy Jassy, the soon to be new CEO of Amazon, is a big Giants fan. He said something like, well, nobody's going to want to live in Philadelphia. The Eagles are based there. And he was probably, who knows if he was joking or not, but people couldn't believe that after all the hard work and the public spectacle, that the choice was going to end up being a little bit of a personal one by the leaders. And, look, some of the worst, most critical interpretations of that project while it was happening was that Amazon was going to go where Jeff wanted it to go and where he owned homes. And he owns homes in New York and Washington, D.C. So they might have had reasons for, the talent that's based there, and the political corridor, the corridor of political power. But ultimately, they rejected the site selection committee's recommendation, and they basically went along with the most cynical interpretations of the whole process from the beginning.
Right. I would have thought that Raleigh would have made a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of businesses have been moving to North Carolina lately. It's a fairly favorable tax environment.
And a low cost to build, right? And some, not too much distance from the corridors of technical talent. But ultimately probably not big enough. I mean, while all this is happening, Seattle's blowing up, and they realize that HQ2 is going to have to be bigger and move faster than they originally thought.
And another controversy that's come up with Amazon is, particularly the pandemic has exacerbated these fault lines between the company and Amazon's workers. Where are things with that?
Well, I mean, I think you're right, but we can only reflect a couple of weeks ago when the employees in Bessemer, Alabama had an opportunity to unionize, and they rejected it by a 2-to-1 margin. So the broad answer to your question is like the status quo kind of prevails. Amazon employs hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in the fulfillment centers. There's probably a lot of disgruntled employees, but there seem to be more employees who are happy and grateful for their jobs, and they work hard, and they move on after a couple of years. But here's what I found out reporting the book, which is that very early on, Bezos, looked around. He knew that Amazon was unique as a technology company, that it was going to employ many, many blue collar workers. But he could look at like the automakers, with these strong unions that, will go on strike or renegotiate a contract every few years. As a result, the factories have moved overseas, and overseas competition has really disrupted that market. Or one might argue that, innovation has come from other sources in the world in terms of automobile innovation. Tesla's a great illustration. Tesla, being just as vehemently anti-union as Amazon. Well, he never wanted an entrenched and disgruntled hourly workforce. He identified that as being a big risk to the company. And so he encoded a kind of reality in the compensation agreements with Amazon employees where like the raises will stop after a couple of years, and the algorithms and the automated machinery that governs their performance, everything's sort of tuned to bring them in, getting a couple of good years from them and moving them out before they slow down or become entitled or disgruntled and join a union. And it sounds brutal. It sounds pretty unfriendly. And it's one reason why I think Amazon's a target now, an explicit target for the president of the United States, Joe Biden, or Bernie Sanders, or labor organizers. But they've managed to, I think, tamp down on any widespread organizing or disgruntlement in the fulfillment centers in part because turnover is really high and people just don't spend a lot of time in those jobs.
Right. It's the nomad land phenomenon that we've all seen in the movie.
Totally. It was a great depiction, right? I mean, you come back every year. It's kind of bittersweet. There's some camaraderie, and then you leave.
Well, Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post in 2013, I think just before your first book on Amazon came out. And I wonder how much of that was a calculated ploy to influence policymakers, advance Amazon's agenda regarding labor, maybe stave off an antitrust case versus just some burning desire to become William Randolph Hearst. I mean, who's buying newspapers these days? What was the real motivation there?
Well, I mean, if it was a political calculation, it was really a bad one, because what he, and I showed this in the book, what he got by purchasing the Washington Post was 4 years worth of pain and controversy during the era of Donald Trump. Amazon arguably lost out on big government contracts because Jeff owned the Post. He attracted the enmity of the Saudi Arabian government and its crown prince, which, who knows, may have led to his phone being hacked. And it's been politically kind of a disaster. Now it's been great for his public image. He's seen as the swashbuckling savior of a free press and an important American institution. But I don't know. I don't think any of that was really in his calculation when he bought it. I think that it was circumstance. The Post was for sale, and here was another kind of playground for him to practice and instill his kind of system of invention. The documents that govern meetings at Amazon, the invention, the focus on new things, the love of technology. The Post's revival under Bezos' ownership has been remarkable, and I think it was. I don't know if there were like cold calculations. Maybe he foresaw that it would be good for his image to be a savior for the newspaper. But my sense is like here was an institution that was worth saving, and he saw some value there in it for him.
Yeah, you are right, though. It definitely made his life a little more complicated, and I don't think that he necessarily anticipated that, particularly with the situation of, kind of him being in this uncomfortable position of having to speak out against the Saudi crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, at a time when Amazon was attempting to expand its interests in the kingdom. And bin Salman and his associates have widely been suspected of being the perpetrators behind the infamous hack of Jeff Bezos's phone. Who do you think the culprit was for that?
Well, okay. I mean, let's back up and say, the real kind of crime was the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post columnist. And then, in the Post's dogged kind of coverage of the murder, and then MBS's, retaliation against the Post and Bezos, the owner, for, the tenacious coverage. And then, the personal saga in his life and his relationship with Lauren Sanchez was happening at the same time. But I conclude in the book that, while MBS may have hacked Bezos's phone, and we really don't know, there hasn't really been an authoritative conclusion on that, or at least one that the cybersecurity community has embraced. There's no evidence. And Ben, I went down every alley and looked in every folder and talked to everyone I could. There's no evidence that the hack led to the National Enquirer story that kind of, splayed out the relationship on the pages of a tabloid newspaper. It really does seem like the brother of Lauren Sanchez was the one who delivered the information to the Enquirer. It's funny because it's now in the rearview mirror. You kind of can't even believe that Bezos, the most disciplined guy in the world, that happened to him and to Amazon. But it was never my conclusion or sense that it was MBS in league with AMI, the company that owns the Enquirer. That would go against a lot of the established evidence that the FBI and federal prosecutors looked at.
And when the news of that affair broke, Bezos did something rather unusual. I mean, most CEOs would probably lay low and wait for the storm to pass and give some kind of a statement like, I'm not going to comment on my personal life. He did the opposite. He went very, very publicly on the offensive. Can you take us inside his strategy for beating the National Enquirer and turning this whole scandal around?
He has a advisor named Gavin DeBecker, whose books, I probably have one on my bookshelf right now. Yeah, here it is. The Gift of Fear, whose books advise, it's all about the psychology of fear and criminals. And DeBecker's books advise when you're faced with an extortion attempt, the best thing you can do is to diffuse it is to just make it public. And then you rip away any of the advantage that the extortionist has. And, Bezos and DeBecker are close, and he just followed the playbook. He publicized the National Enquirer's demands that basically the Enquirer had entered into a non-prosecution agreement with the federal prosecutors in New York in the whole catch and kill allegations against Donald Trump. And AMI was basically saying that it would, obey the law and assist in the investigations of Michael Cohen and Trump world. And AMI was really concerned with Bezos's camp's insinuation that the Bezos story was politically motivated. And if I've lost anyone, I don't blame them. It's totally confusing. And so AMI was basically saying, you can't keep saying this is political. It wasn't political. And here's the information we have, please stop these dangerous insinuations, some of which were, by the way, happening in the Washington Post. And, it was easily read as an extortion attempt. And Bezos followed the DeBecker playbook, and he just published it all. And a lot of it was embarrassing. And, he didn't seem to care, and maybe that's his superpower. Like, he's willing to go fall flat on his face in public with products at Amazon and in his personal life. And, didn't make a difference. The editor of the Enquirer got fired. I tell the whole sordid story in the book, and he moved on. And, we excerpted this part in Business Week magazine last week, and the cover story was, the cover line was Jeff wins again. And that, and that was like he outmaneuvered the tabloids.
And he's recently announced his plans to step back from the day-to-day operations at Amazon and transition from CEO to executive chairman. Did that factor into his decision, or why retire now? What does he want to do?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, Ben. I go back to that antitrust subcommittee hearing last year where he's testifying over Zoom with Mark Zuckerberg and Tim Cook and Sundar Pichai. And I just thought, the whole thing is political theater and spectacle. And he can't get 4 words in edgewise before, someone is talking about, censorship or how Amazon has too much power. And I just wondered, is this really how he wants to spend his time, being the punching bag figurehead? He says he's going to be executive chairman and focus on new products at Amazon. He's also got his philanthropy and Blue Origin, which we talked about. I don't think he'll be going far, but I just feel like Andy Jassy, the successor, presents a kind of humbler target. When you're the wealthiest guy in the world, you're sitting there in front of Congress, like it's not going to end well. And so he gets to kind of hide in plain sight right now.
Yeah, sort of seems like he's following the Bill Gates playbook there. Now, you mentioned in here that Bezos has sort of transformed himself from this kind of geeky guy to this fitness nut. And I've heard stories that he takes like 50 different vitamins a day and he's spending millions or billions on bioscience and longevity. Is he a transhumanist? Does he have plans to live forever?
I've heard some stories too, and I don't know what's true or not. My sense is that he's probably more realistic about immortality. But like clearly the transformation has happened in front of our eyes, right? The geeky technologist is now like, an action hero. And, just like, it's funny because I'm going to start making random non sequiturs right now, but the kind of classic image of the wealthy plutocrat was like, a fat old guy with a cigar, right? And now it's like a super in shape, buff, dude with a clean shaven head who's, sunning on the deck of his yacht. And that's right. And that's the modern billionaire. And Bezos, that's exactly Bezos. And he is building a yacht, which I report in the book. Yeah, which it's funny because 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I would have said, that's not him. He prefers, he likes his jet because it saves him time, but he's so focused. And that it's a really great symbol of how he has evolved.
Well, I know you have to go, Brad. Real quickly before we wrap up here, you've been reporting on Amazon for some time now. What other sectors do you see them expanding into over this next decade?
Healthcare is one that all the big tech companies want to crack. Satellite internet access is another one. Robotics, Bezos, we talked earlier, how he's got, he's trying to realize these science fiction visions and the idea of a robot assistant or a little C-3PO or R2-D2 that follows you around. That's something that Amazon's working on. And then I would say international expansion. It's not just the everything store, it's the everywhere store. And they've got a lot of work to do still in India and South America and probably Eastern Europe, before they reach that kind of global ubiquity. They kind of failed in China already. And so, I think, there's a lot of opportunities there still for Amazon, which is the scary thing because it's already the 3rd largest company in the world. And when you think about it, it's in all the big industries where it operates still have plenty of room to grow, online retail and enterprise computing and voice computers. So, we might be talking in another 10 years, Ben, when I've done the Return of the Jedi installment and Amazon's like a $10 trillion company.
Right. Yeah. That ceiling just, they never seem to hit it. So, well, the book is really fun and fascinating. And again, it's called Amazon Unbound, Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire. Brad Stone, thanks for talking with me.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks again to Brad Stone for coming on the podcast. Order his new book, Amazon Unbound, Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire on Amazon, Audible, or wherever books are sold. And follow Brad on Twitter at @BradStone. If you enjoyed today's episode, then subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Detailed reviews are the best way for new listeners to discover the show. Follow us on Facebook at @KickassNewsPod and email me with your comments, questions, and suggestions at comments@kickassnews.com. Kickass News is a part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com and check out some of our other shows like Food with Mark Bittman, Movie Therapy, Investing for Beginners, My History Can Beat Up Your Politics, and many others. For now, though, I'm Ben Mathis, and thanks for listening to Kickass News.
An Airwave Media Podcast.